Ryobi now makes floor-to-ceiling cleaning easier than ever with cordless cleaning tools powered by 18-volt ONE+ batteries. Whether it's a quick tidy-up or deep cleaning, our powerful and versatile tools make cleaning a breeze. Spend less time cleaning and more time enjoying your pristine home. And because one battery powers over 300 products, you have the power to do more. Visit ryobitools.com to learn more. Sold exclusively at the Home Depot.
A warmer from below. Welcome to lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now part of the Beast and Family podcast. We've got a great podcast for you. Joining me in segment number 2, Mike Randle, who does such great work over at FTN Network, taking a look at a little DFS in the NBA, does a tremendous job on the football front end. He also is an ace when it comes to college basketball, doing his own podcast, a Screen and Screener podcast. We're going to be taking a look at some of the dynamics of conference play that he's been diving in on. A few teams that he's starting to feel a little bit more bullish on. A few teams that he's starting to feel a little bit more bearish on. How to be able to spot some of these buy low, sell high sort of spots on these teams as well. What is a little bit of bad variance of what is actually true about a team as well. And looking at these teams that have gotten off to either really good or really bad starts against the spread and being able to decipher all that. So great chat coming up with Mike in segment number 2. In the final segment, going to get you guys picks and analysis on every game on the betting board for this college basketball Monday as we hit some bank shots. If you have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you do have one of two ways to fire those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at @JNet_D1. Keep in mind, letters EM. Naming does not matter. As per usual, please do send these into the timeline. And the other way is via an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. From there, you are able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. Did not get in any Twitter/X questions today, but had a great day of college basketball on Sunday. Let's take a look back at it. Try to find some trends and try to get to know these teams a little bit better.
Games from yesterday is Greg buzzing about. Here is the rowdy recap.
Here's a trend in college basketball. Bet Minnesota and you'll make money. I do think that sooner rather than later, this against the spread run is probably going to be halted a little bit, but Minnesota now 14-1 against the spread. Our DK Network write-up was backing Minnesota at -1.5. They get the job done, 65-62 against Maryland in a game in which we saw some highly suspect refereeing, to say the least. The goaltend at the end of the game was not necessarily too tremendous, but for Minnesota, they win this game thanks to being able to generate turnovers. They win the turnover battle 17-10, though. Maryland actually had most of those in the first half when they were in the lead, but for Minnesota, after starting out 1 of 14 from three-point range, they rise up in the second half. You had Minnesota be able to get Dawson Garcia going for 11 points, 6 boards, 3 steals, and for Maryland, they just continue to be absolutely awful with their offense on the road. They did go 20 of 24 at the free throw line, but 19 of 50 overall from the floor. Minnesota gets the job done. Maryland cashes another under for you. That has been a hot trend thus far this season, and SMU has been able to do a relatively solid job to the under as well. They don't get the win, but they're able to get a cover against Memphis, who's now 9-5-1 to the over thus far this season as SMU. They have played all but 3 of their games to the under thus far this season, 62-59 the final. Neither of these teams could hit water if they fell out of a boat. SMU 3 of 21 from 3 and 12 of 21 at the free throw line. Memphis 10 of 19 at the charity stripe, 6 of 20 from three-point range. Both of these teams had 16 turnovers. Difference in this game, Davy Jones was the best scorer, 17 points, 9 boards, 4 assists for Memphis. Meanwhile, SMU, they were able to get 12 points, 7 rebounds off the bench from Tariq Smith, but all in all for SMU, just absolutely nothing going in the backcourt for the team in a night that featured a whole heck of a lot of cold shooting, and it's a team that has been relatively dormant with their offense, but they were able to rise up a little bit more here was UTEP, as for UTEP, they get a win, but they do not cover against Chicago State. Are independent. They were able to hold in there, and they actually had the lead with about 4 or so minutes remaining, unable to hold on, but Chicago State gets a cover 74-59. Chicago State has been very good in sort of these wonky games as they shoot north of 50% from the floor, 5-11 from 3, but they were costed by the fact that they lost the turnover battle 27-18. So something to take note of. Another thing to take note of, South Florida, they just continue to play unders. This was another one. They lose to UAB, and UAB on the open was like a 1 to a 2 point favorite. They close at 3.5, so they just barely get the cover here. 75-71, they take down South Florida as a total of about 150 or so is able to stay under. For South Florida, they're starting to heat up a little bit from three-point range, 10 of 28, but they costed themselves at the free throw line. Just 9 of 19 at the charity stripe as Yaxel Lenborg, best player in this game, 23 points, 15 rebounds, a UAB team that was really slow out of the gates to begin the season. All of a sudden, they've been able to get things rocking and rolling. Has not been a great against the spread team, but that said, has now been able to win 6 straight games straight up, so it does feel like they're starting to get things just back on track a little bit. And then we had a lot of Metro Atlantic action that went down on Sunday as well, as right now your best team to the under out there in the Metro Atlantic. That should not come as much of a shock to Marist, but they actually playing over in this game against Fairfield, as they are now 9-3 to the under this far this season after this one went over 82-61. Fairfield gets it done, as for Fairfield, they had Caleb Fields go 10 of 18 from three-point range. He attempted 18 field goals, they all came from three, and he connected for 33 big points, as Fairfield overall, 13 of 30 from the outside. Marist, they get 15 points in this game, along 4 turnovers out of Jaden Collins, but there's just nothing that Marist was able to do in this one, and that turned into a little bit of a harebrained result. And Quinnipiac has also been a really good under team as well for Quinnipiac. They made this cover a little bit less sweaty than my DK Network write-up a few days ago, 76 of 59. They take it to a Manhattan team that they have had a really rough go of it thus far this season for Manhattan. They have John Gallagher coming in from Hartford, and I do think that he's going to be able to do a solid job moving forward, but right now the team is 6-7 against the spread. By the way, going back to Marist, they're actually 9-3 against the spread after that non-cover, but for Quinnipiac, Paul Otino was able to give you 23 points. Team has been really rough against the spread. That would be the old Siena Saints out there in the Metro Atlantic. Fortunately for them, they had no opportunity to be able to lose on Sunday, so they should be feeling very good about that. But St. Peter's is now 8-4 against the spread. They were able to get it done against Mount St. Mary, 70-64. This was a rather pick-em line. St. Peter's about a 1 to a 1.5 point favorite, and St. Peter's has been a relatively solid under team as well, but they were able to get things going in this game by being able to win the turnover battle, 20-14. And Lamont, they have been turning the ball over a whole lot this year with Dakota LeFew, giving you 19 points, 6 boards, but also 4 turnovers in this game for St. Peter's. They aren't an amazing three-point shooting team, but they did go 22 of 27 at the free throw line to be able to do just enough to be able to salt this one away. And Niagara has played all but 3 games to the over this far this season. A traditionally defense-oriented team, they get a nice outright win against Iona. This by a count of 75-73. Iona, they were up 9 points in the second half. Looked like they were going to run and hide, but Bryson Bayless, he had other ideas for this Niagara team, but went 8 of 17 from three-point range. And Niagara now 8-5 against the spread. By the way, as for Iona, just 5 of 19 from three-point range. Iona actually wins the turnover battle 20-7, but they got pounded on the glass, losing that battle 41-24. So Niagara able to win from within, and Niagara able to win with some really good three-point shooting. What has not been good is Michigan. They started out the year 3-0 straight up. Ever since then, straight up 3-9. And from a against the spread standpoint, this team has been pretty putrid, as they are now 5-10 against the spread. They lose to Penn State as a favorite, 79-73, a rare under in a Michigan game as well. But for Michigan, you did have Terrence Williams be able to supply 24 points, but for Penn State, it was the ace in the hole, Ace Baldwin, 25 points, and for Penn State, they win the turnover battle 19-7. That was a big factor that was able to guide them to victory, and being able to guide Temple to victory was the fact that Wichita State was just completely off with their shooting, 68-61. Temple able to get this one done as Wichita State 4 of 15 from three-point range. They shoot 38.5% overall from the floor and lose the turnover battle 18-15 for Temple. They've been a team that has been all over the place, but this is a Wichita State team that they themselves have had a little bit of a tough time getting it going from three-point range. Temple has not been one of your money-making teams all season long, but Wichita State now 4-10 against the spread themselves. A team that has been able to make you money, though. How about the UMass Minutemen? They don't get the outright win against Dayton, but they're able to get a quality cover. 64-60 is about 8.5 point underdogs. They go now to 10-4 against the spread, as for Dayton, they held UMass to shooting just 3 of 22 from distance, but the way that UMass holds in this game, they win the rebound battle 45-33. I've been thoroughly impressed by Josh Cohen, 15 points, 9 rebounds, and Matt Cross, he chipped in their 14 boards as well. For Dayton, you had Aaron Holmes get his with 18 points, but another good result for UMass if you bet them, and this was a good result for IUPUI, who's been one of your worst cover teams all season long. As a double-figure underdog, they hold in there against Youngstown State. They lose this game, IUPUI does, by a count of 65-55, a little bit more of a spirited effort as they were actually leading by 1 point at the half. That improves IUPUI to a nice hearty 4-10 against the spread, but for Youngstown State, just 9 of 31 from three-point range at IUPUI. They actually turned the ball over 28 times in this one, but won the rebound battle 45-33. So that was a rather harebrained result, and what has been interesting to take a look at this season as well has been the Missouri Valley, as Indiana State just continues to be a bulldozer. They were about a 1.5 to a 2-point favorite, and they advanced themselves to 9-5 against the spread by being able to take down Northern Iowa 77-66, just not the same Northern Iowa defense that we saw back in the day. But for Indiana State, how about Jason Kent being able to give you 27 points, and just a different guy on every given day. I mean, for Indiana State, 15 of 34 from three-point range. I mean, one day it'll be like Robbie Avila, Isaac Swope the next day, Ryan Conwell the next. I mean, all these guys, they're doing such a good job in concert for the team. And for Northern Iowa, they were able to have Bowen Bourne go off for 27 points, but nobody else really contributed for this team. And then Old Drake has been really good straight up, but they're only 6-8 against the spread, and they got pounded by Belmont. 87-65 the final as Belmont 12 of 22 for 3. This team is able to dial it up from distance. Malik Dia, 32 big points, and for Drake, 5 of 23 from distance. They are trying to have Tucker DeVries do it all, and it feels like he needs a little bit of help out there in the backcourt, as that was a little bit of a less than savory result. And this is going on as I do this podcast, but with about 4 minutes remaining, Northwestern is up 15 points. They are going to get the win, and they are going to get the cover against Michigan State, and this is going to be a game that goes over the total. As for Michigan State, came into this game riding very, very high, and as I do this, with about 4 minutes remaining, they went 7 of 15 from three-point range, but they are currently losing that turnover battle by 9. Northwestern doing a solid job of holding in there on the glass, as Ty Berry, 20-plus points in this one, and Boo Buie was able to record a double-double. So Northwestern, a team that has been in their own right a little bit shaky against the spread, they're going to get back to 500 there, 6-2 against the spread. The Big Ten, it just feels like it's going to be all about home teams once again this season, and what we've been all about this season in college basketball is taking a look at these trends, and it does feel like we're starting to get a few more unders over the last 7 days. It's still been dominated by overs, 157 overs to 148 unders. That's about a 51.4% hit rate to the over, and these home underdogs have been rough, to say the least. 46-49 and 1 against the spread. That's just over 48% in that clip. Favorites overall this season hitting at north of 51% over the last 7 days. 160, 142, and 8 against the spread. That's just a touch over 53%. If you look at the entirety of the season, that mark for favorites officially 2,220, 1,186, and 40 against the spread. So misspoke there, more like 50.7% to the favorites, but still doing a solid job. Meanwhile, overs hitting at about 51.3%. 1,242 overs to 1,178 unders, with home underdogs 289, 284, and 11 against the spread. So that's what we're seeing in college basketball right now, and that's what we all got on Sunday. Now let's take a look at the lay of the land in college basketball. Not necessarily too many rambunctious games, but we're going to talk to Mike Randle about a few results that stood out to him for the weekend, how he's taking a look at conference play, how to examine some of these teams with good/bad against the spread records this far this season, and so much more here on Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Peterson, now a part of the Beeson Family Podcast. We're back in lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Peterson, now part of the Beeson Family Podcast. It is always great to be joined by this man, Mike Randle. He does absolutely tremendous work taking a look at this game that we all know and love of college basketball. I know he's been doing a tremendous job on this front, but on top of that, for those that like daily fantasy football, he's been an ace on the NFL front. I know he's doing a great job taking a look at things on the NBA side of things, as well as he's got a podcast of his own, the Screener podcast. That's college basketball, that's NBA, that's NBA draft. You're able to find that wherever your podcast. And to be able to follow Mike on Twitter/X, as he is the chief content officer over at FTN Network. You're able to find him at Randle Rant altogether. And Mike, always great to have you aboard. Thank you.
Always an honor, Greg, to talk hoops, man. You cut it up every day. You just go through each and every game. I admire you so much. Thanks so much for having me.
I admire you, my friend. Thank you so much for being aboard. And Mike, now we're finally into conference play. We've gotten about a week and a half lather of it. If you're the Big East, a little bit more than that. But in terms of how you handicap conference play versus non-conference play, have there been any any changes that you've been making to your handicapping, because I always do think that these games, they just have a little bit of a different atmosphere and a tenor behind them. And I do think that we could utilize past history just a little bit more to our benefit. Not that you want it to be an end-all be-all where you're trying to use like baseball trends or anything like that, but that said, I do feel like we're able to look at the team history just a little bit more now than we could in non-conference play.
Hey, we talked about it last time we got together about the parity, and we talked about how you really have to give me a reason to lay points on the road in conference play. So I've adjusted a little bit because I have found that I have to ask myself, can the home team that's getting the points, particularly around those numbers, Greg, 5, 6, when you're favored by 5 or 6 on the road in a conference game, that's really tough. However, we have seen the cream of the crop separate themselves. So, for example, UConn able to cover on Friday at Butler. It was around that 4.5 number. Butler played very well from start to finish, no clinging inside, but Connecticut in the last 2 or 3 minutes took over. Similar game, Mountain West, love San Jose State, have really surprised this year, but Boise State again, losing at the half, losing most of the way, again was able to pull away. And the final one I'll go to, James Madison, who we saw James Madison can struggle against some of these inferior teams, but against Louisiana, who had a massive home court winning streak, again, was able to cover the 6 number. I think they won by 7, something like that. So that's been a big adjustment. It's really tough to lay points on the road with a conference favorite. However, you have to look and say, can that underdog really finish off the upset? Because it takes a lot to put away a Connecticut, James Madison, of course, front and center, and even a Boise State that's well coached by Leon Rice.
And I do think that it has been so interesting to take a look at the way that favorites have been faring in college basketball, because we're doing this late Saturday, early Sunday with a few games needing to be calculated from the very, very late Saturday card. But we saw over the last 7 days in college basketball, favorites heading at north of a 52.5% clip. And I actually do think that this is a little bit correlated. I don't know if you agree/disagree with this, but we've seen a lot more overs in college basketball. In this last 7-day span as well, we've seen about a 55.5% hit rate to the over. Do you attribute a few more overs with these favorites being able to hit as well? Because I always think that when you get lower scoring slogs, that typically helps out the underdog a little bit more. And I do think that with us seeing a little bit more tempo in college basketball, with us seeing much more offensive efficiency, that has actually led to favorites having a bit more value this year than in past years.
It's an excellent point. And what you have to look at also is the old days of these two teams are really slow. For example, looking at a team like Virginia, you just automatically knee-jerk to the under. The lines, of course, have adjusted. And so you really have to find those teams that while they may play at a slow pace or it's a matchup, just because those games are close, if you have a team that plays help and recover defense, but they can give up 3-point shots and the other team gets hot from 3, despite the fact that both teams play at a slow pace, whether you use Ken Palm, whatever you use, that game could go over. You talk about the fouling game at the end so much. So if you have two teams that are close and the spread is low, don't underestimate the point that there could be fouling at the end of the game. So agree with everything you just said. And again, you have to go deeper and really think of each matchup as you like to say, the individual entity, because just because the teams are slow does not mean you should hit the under. You have to try to project as the game is going to go. We talk about it, I had Mike Kutri on my show today about marrying the props to how you think the game is going to go. You also have to marry the total to how you think it's going to go back and forth. Just because they're slow does not mean it's an under.
Yep, and I think that is such a good point that you bring up with the late game fouling as well. And I do think that it just adds importance to something that is preached so much on this show. And I know that it sounds so incredibly elementary, but I always am a believer in this. If you're able to watch games, absolutely do so. There are just some games out there in the Slack, things like that, where you might not be able to get a stream. I mean, that's one thing, but how important do you think it is? Maybe you don't watch like the absolute beginning to absolute end, all 40 minutes of a game, but just try to get a feel for some of these teams. Try to get a feel for especially these late game situations, because something I'm going to find myself doing on this Monday with a very small slate of games is looking back at a few games from Saturday, knowing how the results went and trying to watch those last few minutes, trying to see, all right, did this team down 12 fell or not? Did this team down 8 fell or not? Because I do think that there's great advantages to be had knowing these teams' tendencies at the end of a game that you can't pick up from a spreadsheet or a box score, but you can only really get by having your two eyes on the game.
It is the same. It's such a great point, Greg. It's the same as poker. People play game theory optimal when it comes to poker, just studying mathematically what they should do. But you can't ignore the fact when you're going against someone and sitting in front of them live, knowing whether they have it or not. There is an instinct. And it's the same way. The perfect example was Creighton Providence. Creighton cannot stop anyone from getting to the basket. And if Creighton gets up big, they're going to allow teams to penetrate because they're just not great on the perimeter. Teams have been able to attack them. UNLV especially showed that big time when they ended up playing on a semi-neutral earlier this year. Providence, that line went way too high because Bryce Hopkins was out. It was 11.5. I thought that was crazy. Now they ended up winning by 9, but that game was pretty close. And sure enough, at the end of the game, Providence was able to get to the basket and make a couple. And of course, that's what's going to happen. So yes, watching how teams do guard the ball late in the game is great for over-unders. And it's also great for covering big spreads, because are you going to be able to get some cheap baskets with a guard, a point guard, a shooting guard that can get to the basket late, because they're not going to want to foul.
Yep, absolutely. And I do think that just taking a look at these late game scenarios, I think it's just so big, especially this time of year. As joining me on the show, we have Mike Randle. He does great work over at FTN Network as their Chief Content Officer. Joining me right here on Coast to Coast Hoops. And it has been so interesting to take a look at what we've been getting in college basketball over the last few weeks. And we're doing this as we know most of the results that we saw over the weekend. But have there been a few teams in general over the last few weeks that you've either been a little bit more stock up or stock down on? Because we have seen some big surprises here early on to the season, both through the positive and the negative.
Yeah, I would say that Auburn win at Arkansas was legit. 83-51.
At Bud Walton.
At Bud Walton, pounded them. And I mean, the second half, they just exploded. They hung 46 points on Arkansas in the second half of that game. Really impressive. Not a team that shoots great threes, but they are buying into what Bruce Pearl is doing. Was really impressed with that. A couple others. I think Michigan State is starting to get it right. They were catastrophically bad to start the year. Of course, the loss to James Madison, but that's looking better and better as the year's going on. Had the back-to-back losses at home to Wisconsin, but Malik Hall didn't play in that game. And then Nebraska away, which actually looks pretty good. They are starting to get things right here, shooting hot from three-point range, and that triumvirate guards of Aiken, Hogarth, and Tyson Walker, really, really impressive. So those are two that I like right now. Teams that are struggling. Look, I know a lot of people down in Villanova, Greg. Kyle Neptune is on a hot seat. There is no doubt about it here. They are struggling. St. John's took them. There was one game I was able to watch, but it was at my family party. From start to finish, St. John's was able to comfortably win that game. Again, coaches that have experience, that have a history of winning, are finding a way to get it done. Even Bill Self in a tough matchup against Jamie Dixon, who usually does well. I don't know why that line was 9.5. Usually does well against Self. Again, great coaches really can separate themselves from the pack. And Patino with a great win at Villanova. The Wildcats, even though they're 3-0 in the Big East, they lost to St. Joe's, they lost to Drexel, they lost to Kansas State. Again, they beat Creighton away, but Creighton and me sometimes can struggle. DePaul, Xavier, now the loss to St. John's. They better get things right here. I'm curious. Kyle Neptune, a lot of questions coming out about him. Still no Justin Moore, but that's one that I think I have my eye on that could be disappointing as the year goes on.
Going back to your point on Michigan State as well, I'm so glad that you brought them up, because something that I take a look at for this time of year is just some of these outliers with regards to shooting as well. Because for Michigan State, I do think that them being number 3 in all of college basketball last year, they were probably a little bit lucky with their three-point shooting. I think that even admittedly, Tom Izzo and company would probably tell you that as well. But when they were shooting sub 30% from three-point range going into that game against Baylor a few weeks ago, you knew that they were a better team than that. Meanwhile, you take a look at some of these teams that they are shooting like well north of 40% from three-point range. I think that they're due for a regression as well. Is this something that you take a look at as well? Because to your point against Michigan State, I feel like there was a really nice buy low point on them going into that game against Baylor. And I still think that the market hasn't necessarily corrected enough for them. And now we're seeing a lot of these teams that have gotten off to super hot starts that maybe have gotten shots of fall that typically they don't fall, are starting to get a little bit overvalued. And I think that that's a good place to find some value this time of year.
Most of the people that listen to your pod, I'm sure, Greg, are college hoops junkies like you and I, and they watch these games. What I would recommend to everyone is if you had a belief prior to the start of the year I'm not saying that you shouldn't change it, but I'm saying don't give up on it so quickly. For example, Shaheen Holloway is an excellent coach. We know that going back to St. Peter's. Seton Hall really struggled, lost 4 or 5 to start the year. But look what happened here. They've won 5 of their last 6. They beat Providence away. They beat Marquette at home. So both ways, if you see a team that you think is good, whether it's the coach, the players, whatever it is, don't necessarily abandon that because they're playing really well or they're playing poorly. Everyone is going to have regression, both positive and negative, and that's another example. If you believe in a team and you think they're going to have a good season, maybe they just got off to a bad start and things can really turn around. Seton Hall scalding hot right now, 10-5, 3-1 in the Big East. Look out.
Yeah, I mean, it's been really nice to take a look at the Seton Hall team as well, pulling off that nice win against Marquette. And I just take a look at that entire Big East, and one thing that I think we can have absolutely no debate about whatsoever, this ball team is truly terrible. They were able to get a cover, credit where credit is due. So, congratulations on covering against Georgetown, but man, I think that we can all agree there, but past that, I do think that this is very much a wide open Big East where we've seen a lot of varying results. Creighton has been a little bit hot and cold. Providence has been able to play some relatively solid defense. Marquette, I love their offense, but at the same time, they don't necessarily have a ton of rebounding as well. I think the Big East is one of those conferences that, based on the actual matchup itself, based on just the situation, the scheduling spot, I think that there's a lot of money to be made because there's a lot of high-powered teams, and I do think that just night in and night out, there could be a lot of craziness when it comes to this conference as a whole.
Yeah, if you look at them right now, Georgetown's going to struggle this year. Ed Cooley's yelling at the fans they need to come out. No, Ed, that's not how it works. You have to win first and the fans come out, especially when you got that big contract. We talked about DePaul, but look at the rest of the Big East. Butler, 1-3 in the Big East, but they're always tough at home, Greg. You know that. Xavier, of course, going to be very tough with Sean Miller. They've been up and down, coming off the loss away to Villanova by 1, but they're going to host Connecticut on Wednesday. Let's see how they do there. You have Providence. Bryce Hopkins is out, but they competed well. Creighton can shoot, can score, and their metrics are really good, but I think there's a chasm of difference between the metrics and how they really play in some of these big games. Last year, Greg, they beat Baylor. That was the big second-round win. Ryan Nembhard had 30 in that game. Ryan Nembhard's not there anymore, so I think there's questions. But St. John's, Villanova, UConn, Seton Hall, all these teams are capable of winning games either home or away, and you're seeing lines that are just not adjusting. Marquette's favored by 5.5 against Seton Hall. Seton Hall gets the window as a money line win. So a lot of balance, a lot of really good teams, and a lot of great betting opportunities as well.
These underdogs in the Big East have been absolutely cashing like wildfire. So that has been something to be mindful of. And how much do you stick stock into some of those conference trends? Because this year, we just laid it out in the Big East, and if you're trying to catch points with DePaul, who I still remember in that game against UConn, they were catching 23 and they got lambasted by north of 30. They've just been a dead side all season long. But past that, the underdogs have been doing really well. As we know, in Big Ten play, firing up these home teams, it's worked out so well in past years for you as well. How much do you take a look at some of those conference trends? Because I do think the conference to conference, there is some different tenors. I always take a look at the Metro Atlantic, for example, a little bit closer to your neck of the woods. And because of reduced travel, I do award a little bit less for home court there. And I do think that these are big things to take a look at as well, because conference to conference, I think that home court advantage and how much value / lack of value there is on those underdogs really does mean something as well.
Yeah, the trends to me are sprinkles on the Sunday. You can't move forward just with the trend. So, for example, the number 1 team against the spread is Minnesota this year, 13-1. That's not, Greg, why I like them at Michigan. I like them to keep it close against Michigan because I think Michigan has some question marks, very inconsistent coaching, the whole thing. But then I'm like, and Minnesota was 12-1 coming into the game against the spread. Scott Cross, who I think is a very underrated coach with Troy, playing App State at home, getting points. I think it was 3.5. I like the matchup. I love their offensive rebound against App State, which is what you have to do. App State has not played well ever since beating Auburn. They've not played well, have struggled with consistency. Oh, and by the way, Troy is 9-2-1 against the spread. So to me, those trends are sprinkles on the Sunday. You handicap the game, you do your projections, you come down with where you think the line should be, then you see the line, you look at some of the trends and you say, okay, great, maybe that increases your wager a little bit. But you can't just blindly look at the fact that Minnesota and BYU are fantastic. You have to say, I like them, and okay, here's something else to look at as well as sort of an ancillary point to your handicap.
Yep, I'm right there with you on that front as Mike Randle does great work over at FTN Network, joining me right here on Coast to Coast Hoops. And it is so interesting to look at some of those teams because typically this time of year, I do find myself going against these teams that get off to demonstrative against the spread starts. I did actually write up Minnesota against Maryland for Sunday. That was a spot where I took a look there just because there are so many scenarios where it's like, man, I do think that this team is getting a little bit overvalued, but I thought that that was a good spot for Minnesota as we record this. We are unsure how that turned out. Well, yet hopefully it turns out very well when you guys hear this. But that said, how much do you take a look at that a little bit? These teams that they do go like 3-10 against the spread to start the season. And because people have been burnt by them, they sort of put them on a blacklist because I do think that that sometimes increases their value, unless if you're a team like IUPUI, Detroit, where they truly are just dead sides.
Yeah, you have to look to see if you think they can cover. So, for example, I watched IUPUI. They have struggled this year. They have not looked good. So even when they're home and they're getting a couple points, I tend to fade them. So again, looking at a team, seeing that their struggle, Detroit has been horrific this year, 3-14 against the spread. Old Dominion, of course, really struggling with the situation with the coach. God bless him. Hopefully he's okay. Against Arkansas State, I like Arkansas State. They've impressed me. They've competed well. They've had some big wins. They can get flammable. So I'm going to lay the 9 points. And oh, by the way, Old Dominion going through it in 3-11 against the spread. So yes, however, you will see those situations where you see like in Eastern Kentucky can pop up and play well, and you say, okay, now we're talking about ASUN play. Now they're playing Lipscomb. They're home. They're only favored by 1. So again, you have to realize just because a team is bad against the spread doesn't mean it's always going to be bad against the spread, but look at the matchup. Do they have an advantage statistically? Is the other team not playing well? Do they defend the 3 well, and the other team relies a large amount of their points on 3s, things like that. But again, if I see a team that I like to fade, and there's some teams here that I'm fading, and you see that they're bad against the spread, maybe you increase it a little bit because sometimes the lines assume that you're going to get better, assume that IUPUI is going to bounce back and Detroit's going to bounce back, and you say, you know what, they're not bouncing back. I've seen them a couple times. They are not good.
And sometimes it's a little bit misleading as well because the opener might be 8. It might close at like a 10.5. Team wins by 10. That technically counts as an against the spread loss, even though on a lot of numbers they were able to cover as well. And if they're like 3-9 against the spread, you got like 2 or 3 of those. That completely warps how a team is actually doing as well. And then you just have your teams that they're like catching 10 points and they're losing by 40 on the regular like Detroit is. Well, that's a little bit of a different scenario as well. So I do think that sometimes ATS records can lie a little bit as well, but a man that always tells the truth, a man that always lays on us cold, hard facts, that'd be you, Mike. You do such a tremendous job over at FTN Network, taking a look at so many different things, college basketball, NBA, NFL, list goes on and on. Love to get people at home know it's all on tap for you and how people can follow along on social media and other platforms.
Yeah, join me over at FTN Fantasy. We're in the middle of a website changeover. Everything's coming under FTN Fantasy, which is great. Follow me on X at Randle Rand. So many great things. We have our models going here, Frank Brank and Mike Kutry, of course, with his props. And I got my college basketball betting show 3 days a week. Right now I'm going Tuesday, Wednesdays at 2, at 10:30 on Saturday morning, cup of coffee. Join me. Tell me you like me, you fade me, whatever it is. We're just here to talk about college hoops like Greg, and we love to get the reactions and the interaction here with college hoops taking the forefront as NFL is hitting the playoffs.
Yep, and the college football national title game happening on Monday as well, so that'll give a little bit more shine and love to this great game of college basketball as well, and a man that covers it all 365 days out of the year, except for this year, 366 days with a leap year. Mike Randle does such an excellent job on this front, and every single time he joins this podcast, lends tremendous insight. So big thanks to Mike for joining me on Coast to Coast Hoops, now part of the VSiN family of podcasts. And coming next, it is that time of the podcast. I give you picks and analysis on every game on the betting board for this college basketball Monday as we hit some big shots. And we're back here in lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now part of the VSiN family of podcasts. It is always great to be joined by Mike Randle, doing an absolutely tremendous job taking a look at this game that we all know and love of college basketball. Every single time he joins this podcast, he lends such good insight, and man, it has been a very fascinating season to say the least, and he's been one of the best at being able to persevere through it all. So a big thanks to Mike for joining me in the last segment. Now it is that time of the podcast. I give you picks and analysis on every game on the betting board for this college basketball Monday as we hit some bank shots.
Most financial establishments close at a certain time, but not here. It is time for a side and total on every game on today's betting board bank shots.
do note that, as per usual, any changes that are made to these plays will be listed up on my Twitter/X feed at GNN_D1, and we are going to be going in Las Vegas Station order. This is where we go with really the lone game involving a bigger conference first. That'd be Northeastern and Monmouth. Everything else from there is on the extra games board, and that's pretty much going to be in time order. I could go into a much more convoluted sort of breakdown, but why waste time when we don't need to? So we get into this lone game on the normal board. 861, 862. It is Northeastern hitting the road face-off against Monmouth, and Monmouth is a favorite of 3.5 points. Total on this game is 140.5. This time I total 139.5. I'm going to be looking at the under. Both of these teams really don't push a lot of tempo. Now, I will say for this defense of Northeastern, it has been highly suspect, but I also just don't trust in this offense of Northeastern either, and I do think that we're going to be seeing a little bit of slippage when it comes to this Monmouth 3-point shooting. So I'm going to be taking a look at this total under. Monmouth 217th in the country in terms of points scored on a per possession basis, and then we've got a Northeastern team that just due to the turnovers, they have been really hurting themselves. Northeastern, interestingly enough, averaging about 8.3 points more per 100 possessions when they're on the road rather than when they are at home. They're about 123rd in the country in terms of points scored on a per possession basis. I do think that this is a little bit of fool's gold, and I do think that this is going to be regressing quite a bit. So I'm going to be looking there, as I did set Monmouth as a 5.5 point favorite. With Northeastern, they're going to have the best pure rebounder in this game. That'd be Chris Doherty. He comes in from Notre Dame, 12.5 points, 7 boards, 2.5 assists. I love his overall game, but you've got Natika Kusanetsovsky, hopefully I said that correctly, for Monmouth, being able to supply about 7.5 boards per contest. And then Jack Collins is just all sorts of versatile. He and Xander Rice combined for 2.7 steals per game. Rice, the top scorer for Monmouth. He actually followed his coach King Rice over to Monmouth after beginning his career at Bucknell. 19 points per contest, shooting 33% from 3. He doesn't necessarily shoot it amazing from 3, but he has really elevated a Monmouth team that just last year was in the bottom 25 in the country in terms of points scored on a per possession basis. They were awful from 3-point range last season. Now they're shooting about 37.2% from 3-point range. But getting back to Collins, he does give you about 7 boards per contest. He generates a little bit over a steal, 11 points per game. I absolutely love what he's been able to do. And this is a Monmouth team that they've really been able to win their games from the perimeter. They bomb it well from 3-point range in terms of a 3-point shooting defense. They've been able to hold up relatively well here. At home, they're allowing opponents to shoot just 32.5% from 3-point range. This is a Northeastern team that they're relatively okay from the perimeter as well with this Northeastern team. They're much better offensively than defensively, as defensively, actually outside the top 300 in terms of opponents' 3-point shooting percentage, but that actually drops to 35.2% when they're on the road. I do fear that this is a Monmouth team that is a little bit top heavy, but you've been able to get a little bit more down low, 4.5 boards, a block, a steal per game out of Jared Valencia. I think that that's going to be big for them moving forward, and for this Northeastern team, I think that they are going to be hurt by their turnover woes. About 13 turnovers per game is a low tempo team. They shoot 31% from 3. Each other top 4 scorers shoot less than 30% from 3-point range. So the meat of the Monmouth defense has actually been on the interior, and that's where they're going to be able to really be able to bat down the hatches here. Got Joe Pridgeon, who's been able to give you about 10.6 boards per contest. Lucas Sakota, he's been able to do a relatively solid job on that front as well. But really having Chris Doherty and not a whole heck of a lot else on the glass, I do think it's going to be very costly. This is a Northeastern team that has been able to generate some second and third chances. In terms of overall offensive rebound rate, this team ranks 58th in all of college basketball. But I do think that Monmouth going to be able to hold up on the glass, that allow them to be able to control this game. And Monmouth, they themselves about 115th in the country with regards to offensive rebound rate as well. So this is a spot where I did set my total 139.5. Both of these teams being relatively slow tempo teams. Looking at the under, and with Monmouth, one to lay up to 5 with them. Now we hit the extra games.
The normal betting board picks are complete, but there are some extra games today, so we go into the bonus.
This begins with 306-583, 306-584. Southeast Louisiana hits the road face-off against Nicholls, and Nicholls is a 4.5 point favorite. Total on this game is 138.5. While Nicholls is not generating the same amount of turnovers as they did a season ago, this is still a team with some active hands, and they've got a lot of nice versatility. I did set my line at a 4.5 as well, so I'm going to be waiting on a little bit of movement here. We were seeing a few openers in which you were able to get some various numbers. This total has come down from the opener of 139.5, and a little bit earlier on during the day, I was seeing a few 4s pop, and if we're able to get a 4, going to be willing to lay it. If we get up to 5, I'm going to be willing to take those points when it comes to Southeast Louisiana. This team is in the bottom 55 in the country in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. That's a little bit bit off-putting, but for this Southeast Louisiana team, they have really slowed things down. They've actually been quite a bit more efficient with regards to their offense on the road rather than at home as well. They're averaging 5.8 points more per 100 possessions in a road environment rather than a home environment. And for Nicholls, this team is not really dominated by guards. They're dominated by a bunch of, we're going to call them like 6'5", 6'6" joker players that do a little bit of everything, as your main two contributors for this team has been Dante Smith, who comes over from South Alabama, and then you've been able to get great production out of Jamal West. West right around 17 points, 9 boards, 6'6", do-it-all player that is shooting 36% from three. Smith shoots 38% from the outside, and Smith chips in there 2.5 steals, 6.5 boards, 14.5 points per game. That is going to be a lot for the Southeast Louisiana team to be able to go up against. And now you've got Byron Ireland, who's been able to elevate this Nicholls backcourt a little bit as well. It's a team that they only generate about 7 turnovers per game thus far this season in terms of live ball steals, but for Southeast Louisiana, they're actually equipped to be able to take on this sort of a team, with Roger McFarland at 6'5", being a do-it-all player, shoots 34% from three, 13.5 points, 7 boards per game. Out of your top 4 scorers, 3 of them do give you at least 5.3 rebounds per game. That includes Broden Woodbury, who's been able to give you about 5.5 boards, might be the best shot blocker in this game. It is a Southeast Louisiana team that does need to buckle it down a little bit more with regards to taking care of the ball. As in terms of turnovers per game, they're hovering right around about 14th, but I am a little bit concerned about this Nicholls team on the glass. If you take a look at total rebound rate, this team, one of the lesser ones out there in all of college basketball. Nicholls out of 362 Division I schools, clocking in 333rd. This is actually their first home game of the season, by the way, so they have all road stats. Meanwhile, Southeast Louisiana closer to 208, so I do think that that's going to keep Southeast Louisiana lively in this game. That said, I do think that this total is a little bit too low. Recognize that Southeast Louisiana has been cranking it down with regards to their tempo just a little bit, but both of these teams have had their issues on defense, especially Southeast Louisiana. As I was laying up, but Nicholls, they themselves 291st in the country in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. I do think that we get a game close enough for late game felling, so semi-total 144.5, looking at the over, and with Nicholls, want to lay up to 4 with them, 5 or more, going to be a take for me with the points with Southeast Louisiana. 306, 585, 306, 586. NC Central is going to be playing us to Norfolk State. Norfolk State is a pick'em. Total is 137.5, and I think that Norfolk State should be a 3-point favorite. I am going to be willing to take them on this pick'em line for Norfolk State. They absolutely do need to buckle down on the defensive side of things. 346th in the country in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. NC Central is 242nd, but with this Norfolk State team, they really have gone out there. They've been able to challenge themselves, and I do think that for Norfolk State, where they're going to be able to win this game is by being able to just neutralize the fact that NC Central just doesn't have the same 3-point shooting that they did a season ago. Last year, this was a top 30 team in terms of 3-point shooting percentage. They're outside the top half of all of college basketball, and typically Norfolk State as an Achilles heel down low. That is not going to be unearthed by NC Central. Other than Emmanuel Izabuner, you don't have anyone that gives you north of 5.5 rebounds per game. NC Central, 315th in the country in terms of rebound rate. That actually goes downward at home. And for Norfolk State, they typically dominated in this aspect. They're about 280th, but in this game, they're going to have a little bit of an advantage. And then for this Norfolk State team, you do have quite a few guys. They're able to light it up from 3-point range. It can be very touch and go with regards to their outside shooting, but they're headlined by a guy that comes in from UNC Wilmington and Jamari Thomas, who's been able to give you about 17.5 points, 3.5 boards, 3.5 assists, making north of 40% of his threes. And then you've got so many guys that are able to contribute on the back end for this team. Whenever you've got Christian Ings healthy, as he's dealt with injuries last few seasons, he's been a relatively dynamic 3-point shooter. He gives you about 8 points per contest. Alan Bentron shooting 39.5% from the outside for a Norfolk State team that, even though they have had their defensive woes, they're still generating right around about 9 steals per contest. And this is a Norfolk State team that has actually done an okay job of being able to guard the 3-point arc. They're right in the neighborhood, about 200th in the country in terms of opponents' 3-point shooting percentage. And NC Central, actually a top 50 team in terms of opponents' 3-point shooting percentage. I do think that quite a bit of that has been 3-point shooting luck, and I do think that that's going to be going downward a little bit. And for NC Central, it's really just 3 guys that are contributing for this team, as you've got Pool Boy King, Fred Cleveland, along Jadarius Harris. All 3 of these guys have been able to combine for about 45.5 points per contest. None of these guys give you north of 4.5 rebounds per game. Cleveland has been a good facilitator. 4.9 assists, 1.6 steals per contest, and NC Central has some active hands. They're able to generate about 9 steals per contest, but they're shooting 32% from 3-point range. Harris shoots 42% from the outside, which has been relatively encouraging, but other than Izabuner, you got absolutely nothing down low, and as a matter of fact, he's a booner, down to about 5 rebounds per game for this team as well. So just a plethora of shooting options for Norfolk State. I do think is going to be able to take hold in this one. For Norfolk State, defense has looked much better recently, giving up 72 points or fewer in 4 of their last 5 games. Credit where credit is due. NC Central has allowed 70 or fewer in each of their last 5 games as well. So I do think that this turns into a slog. When Norfolk State made the NCAA tournament a few seasons ago, they really hung their hat on defense. They got much better on defense as the season went along. I think we're seeing that here. Going to be taking Norfolk St on this pick 'em line. Made them a 3-point favorite and made my total 135, so also looking under. 306-587, 306-588. Northwestern St plays us to McNeese. McNeese is a 19.5 point favorite, and your total on this game anywhere between 141.5 and 142. And Northwestern St stinks. I'm not going to try to tell you that this is some sort of an amazing team or anything like that, but 19.5 point home underdogs. This has just gotten to a little bit of a point of no return. I'm going to be willing to take the points, and I set my number at 17. I really like this McNeese team. They're one of the better mid-major teams in all of college basketball. They've went on the road. They've knocked off ECU. They went on the road and knocked off Michigan, and you've got Christian Schulmade, who's going to be able to win the battle down low. 12 points, 9 boards, doesn't shoot it amazing from 3, but with this McNeese team, they're a top 5 team in all of college basketball in terms of fewest turnovers on a per possession basis. You've been able to get so much production out of HOU Wells. Nearly 4 assists, 2.5 steals, 19 points, 42.2% three-point shooting, and as a collective, this team is shooting 39.5% or so from three-point range. It is a McNeese team that, with regards to their three-point shooting defense, so it does leave a little bit of something to be desired. 173rd in the country with that regard. This is a Northwestern St team that they're looking to find anything that they do well. Opponent's three-point shooting is right around about 234th for them, so that's honestly not too terrible. Now, they have to go up against guys like Ontavion Comm, who comes over from Cal State Bakersfield, meet me for the Roadrunners. He shot it well from 3, and as a matter of fact, I have your top 5 scorers for McNeese. 4 of them shoot at least 41.9% from 3. I do think that that's going to cool down a little bit, and for Northwestern State, they themselves only shoot about 30.5% from the outside, but their top scorer in Cliff Davis, shooting north of 40% from the outside, 16 points per game. This team is going to get land-based down low. They've got only one guy that gives you north of 4.5 rebounds per game. That would be Jamison Epps, who's been able to give you about 6 boards per contest. But for this Northwestern State team, the wheels are starting to turn a little bit more for the offense. 70-plus points in 2 out of their last 3 games. And it's been a team that's been getting slammed on defense as well, and have given up 75-plus points each out of their last 5 games. And for this McNeese team, because they do play so slowly, because they are in the bottom 40 in terms of total possessions per game, it just makes it really difficult for them to be able to win by a margin like this. I do think that McNeese going to go out there, they're going to be able to completely dominate this Northwestern State team, but that said, I just think that this is going to be such a slow slog of a game, and you've got a McNeese team that has been able to do actually a really supreme job defensively. 67 points or fewer surrendered, and now 4 out of their last 5 games, and overall for the season, they have allowed north of 68 points just twice this far this season. So I did set my total 139.5, diving in on the under, but with that said, in this spot, I could only set McNeese as a 17-point favorite. So I'm going to be willing to take the points with Northwestern State. I think they're going to be saved by the fact that this game is low possession, and I'm going to be taking a look at the under. 306-589, 306-590. Coppin State plays Western Maryland Eastern Shore, and the Shore finds themselves as 1.5 to 2-point road favorites. Totals anywhere between 130.5 and 131. I made my total 123.5. I'm going to be taking a look at this total under. Coppin State should be very fortunate that Mississippi Valley State is currently in existence, because Coppin State is averaging 78.1 points per 100 possessions. If you take Mississippi Valley State out of the fold, and Mississippi Valley State is actually averaging 5.7 points fewer per 100 possessions than Coppin State, your next lowest team is averaging 83.7 points per 100 possessions. That really tells you how bad this Mississippi Valley State offense is, but you take Mississippi Valley State out of the fold, every other team in Division I college basketball is averaging more than 5 points more per 100 possessions than the Coppin State team. So that really does speak to me in this one, and that's a big reason why I'm going to be willing to lay it with Maryland Eastern Shore. Could only make them a 3.5 point favorite, and this is a Maryland Eastern Shore team that they themselves have their offensive doldrums, 348th in the country in terms of points scored on a per possession basis, but Troy Upseed should be able to dominate this game down low. 12.5 points, 8.5 boards, is someone that's able to pop some threes, only pops them at about a 27% clip, but in this game, that's not too bad, because you've got a Coppin State team that, as a whole, that'd be above average. 25.3% three-point shooting team. You've got a Coppin State team that among players that are actually out there on the floor and currently performing, because Malik Battle is currently out due to an injury. You've got one guy averaging north of 3 points per game that shoots above 28.8% from three-point range. That's just absolutely deplorable, and that'd be Isaiah Gross, who just returned in the team's last game against Delaware St, and I believe he went 2 of 5 from three-point range. That's all that you've got right now for this team. Justin Winston, 14 points, 5 boards. He's done his part. You've got one other player that averages north of 6.5 points per game, Greg Spurlock. It's 16 turnovers per game. Now, I will say for this Coppin State team, they do generate about 8 steals per contest, and Maryland Eastern Shore, they themselves have seen a big drop-off after they were a top 10 team in the country in terms of turnovers forced on a per possession basis. They're only generating about 7 steals per game thus far this season, but at the very least, they've got more than just like 2 options to be able to score. You've got Chance Davis, you've got Devin Ellis, both giving you between about 9.5 to 10 points per contest. They both shoot in the neighborhood about 33% from 3. Tyler Mack, the Mack truck, is able to shoot nearly 40% from 3-point range as well. Now, other than Hupseed, you don't have anyone else that really gives you north of 4 rebounds per game, but this is a Coppin State team that they themselves have been horrible on the glass. Now, it is a little bit of a case of something's got to give, because I was mentioning the absolutely horrendous nature of these offenses. Well, you take a look at the defenses, and it's not necessarily a whole heck of a lot better in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. Got a Maryland Eastern Shore team as clocking in 338th, and Coppin State is a little bit better, but they themselves are outside the top 275 with this regard as well. So I did set my total at 123.5. I think that this is going to be a slug, but just because you've got more shooting options with this Maryland Eastern Shore team, I do think that they get the job done, and they've got the best rebounder in this game. So, going to be one to lay it with the short, set them as a 3.5 point favorite. I made my total 123.5, so also diving in on the under. 306.591, 306.592. It is New Orleans. They play host to Texas A&M Commerce. Commerce between a pick 'em to a 1-point underdog with your total 144, and I did set my total at 153.5. I'm going to be looking at the over. Since coming onto the betting board prior to the 2018-19 season, top over team in all of college basketball in their time span has been this New Orleans bunch. This New Orleans bunch is playing some, shall we say, Olay style of defense right now, as in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. This should come as a shock to absolutely nobody whatsoever. They're back outside the top 250, but they've got Jordan Johnson, who has been one of the best scorers in all of college basketball last 2 years. Last year, shot 49% from 3-point range. That was a top 5 mark in all of college basketball. That's dropped off a little bit to 36%, but still supplying 20.5 points, 4 assists, only turns the ball over about 2.2 times per contest, and New Orleans last year, north of 16 turnovers per game, down to 13 per game. They're playing a little bit more slowly this year, but they're still a relatively up-tempo team. You do need to find a number 3 guy. Caleb Wilson-Rouse has become that number 2, 11 points per contest, but this is a Texas A&M Commerce team that they themselves just have a shortage of guys that are really able to pop it, which is why I'm going to be one to lay it with New Orleans. And on top of that, New Orleans, they just have a shortage of rebounding down low. Jamon Vincent at 6'4" is your top rebounder with about 5.8 rebounds per game. But for Commerce, you don't have a single guy on the roster that gives you north of 4.6 rebounds per game, as Jerome Brewer has had to do a little bit of everything. He gives the team right around about 4.6 boards per contest, a nice double-figure score. And this is a Commerce team that is now shooting about 31.7% from 3-point range. They generate about 8.5 steals per contest. I like what I've been seeing out of Kalen Williams. Shoots 34.5% from the outside, 13.5 points per game. And they've been able to get a little bit of a spark from some of the ancillary pieces out there in the backcourt as well. But this is a team that they just really lack any sort of a low-post presence. And when you lack a low-post presence like that, you better be really good along the perimeter. And Texas A&M Commerce, they are 221st in all of college basketball in terms of opponents' 3-point shooting percentage. Now, this New Orleans team, they certainly allow their wide open 3-point looks as well. New Orleans about 164th in the country in terms of opponents' 3-point shooting percentage, but it actually elevates to 50% at home. I'm going to go out here on a limb and say that that is a little bit of an outlier, and I do think that that is going to be improving quite a bit. But even though New Orleans typically they get just completely plowed on the glass, this game they're going to have a little bit of advantage. 349th in the country is this New Orleans team in terms of total rebound rate, but now they're going up against the Texas A&M Commerce team that, with all of their lack of size down low, they're clocking in 353rd. So I'm going to be willing to lay with New Orleans, set them as 3.5 point favorite. I think that this is an up and down game in which both of these teams are going to be seeing lots of second and third chances. So looking at the over, and I'm going to be willing to lay with New Orleans. 306.593, 306.594. You've got Morgan State, and they're going to be playing us at Delaware St. Old Delhi State is a 3-point road favorite. Your total is between 145.5 and 146. I set my line at 5. I'm going to be willing to lay it. This is a Morgan State team that's just dealing with too many injuries right now. If Morgan State had their full allotment of guys out there, I would be willing to jump in on them, as now the good news is they've got Winston Tabbs back in the fold. Winston Tabbs has returned for the last 2 games, has a combined 24 points since his return overall for the season, averaging about 15.5 points on 34.9% three-point shooting, but his team has been badly hurt by the fact that they've been dealing with Miles Thompson being out due to injury. Did return in the team's last game against Maryland Eastern Shore, but only for 15 minutes, 4 points, 4 boards, did not look like himself. Team loses that game to Maryland Eastern Shore, and this is a Morgan State team that they're looking to play a little bit more up-tempo, but they just have not been able to get things sorted out with regards to their defense, as for Morgan State, they have now given up 75-plus points against Division I competition in all but 2 of their games thus far this season. So that's a big, giant issue going up against a Delaware State team that they themselves have been having some rough goes of it on offense, 61 points or fewer in 4 of their last 5 games. So this is going to be a situation of something's got to give, and I do think that the defense wins out semi-total 143, looking at the under. But with this Delaware State team, they've got Javon Munoz along with Martez Robinson combining for about 30.5 points per contest, both shooting about 36 to 36.5% from 3-point range. It is a Delaware State team that turns the ball over 15.5 times per contest. That's going to be hurting them quite a bit, but this is also a Morgan State team that is getting absolutely tattooed on the glass. 330th in the country in terms of overall rebound rate, and while Delaware State doesn't necessarily have that 1 or 2 featured guys on the glass, they are a team that ranks in the top 125 with regards to overall rebound rate. You've got someone in Brandon Stone who doesn't pull in rebounds, but he's 6'11". He's able to pop a few threes when he's out there, as he's been dealing with a little bit of injury, and that has allowed for some more minutes for Raymond Sullivan, he's right around 6'11". With Somerville, he's been able to do a solid job of shot blocking throughout his career. And then you've got Wesley Oba, who's come in, been able to give the team right around about 5.5 boards per contest. He provides some good size as well. You just don't have that with this Morgan State team. For Morgan State, they shoot about 31.5% from 3-point range, and they do go relatively up-tempo, but 14.7 turnovers per contest, that has been very costly for them. And this is a Delaware State team that has actually made it a little bit of a priority to play some defense. Morgan State well outside the top 300 in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis, and for Delaware State, if they can just continue to improve a little bit with their 3-point shooting defense, as they're allowing opponents to shoot 37.2% from distance on the road, this team should be fine, as Morgan State, they themselves 271st in the country in terms of opponents' 3-point shooting percentage. So this is a spot where I did set Delaware as a 5-point favorite. I'm going to be willing to lay it with the Hornets of Delaware State, and made my total 143, so also going in on the under. 306.595, 306.596. Howard, it's a road face-off against South Carolina State. South Carolina State just find themselves as home underdogs of between 3.5 and 4 points. Your total on this game, getting it anywhere between 154 and 155. Did set mine at a 155, so seeing a lot of 154.5 out there. I'm going to be taking a look at the over. This is a Howard team that just year in and year out, they play at a breakneck pace. They're really looking to push tempo once again this season. Maybe not quite as much as they have in past years, but still, you know that you're going to be getting a very up-tempo game in this one. Howard also has the best player out there on the floor. That'd be Seth Towns. Towns has come in after being the Ivy League Player of the Year seemingly 500 billion years ago, and he has found that for him once again, being able to supply Howard with about 15.5 points, 6.5 boards, nearly 2.5 assists per contest, and standing right around 6'9", is shooting 40% from 3-point range for a Howard team that is in the top 75 in terms of total possessions per game. And you want to know who's playing even faster than them? How about South Carolina State? 25th in the country in terms of total possessions per game, and I can tell you right now, it has not necessarily resulted in a lot of points. This is another team that is well outside the top 300 in terms of points scored on a per possession basis. As a matter of fact, 324th to be exact, and we're in the South Carolina State team, not like they're necessarily making do with great defense as well. 329th in the country in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. They do have Davion Everett, who's able to give you about 10 points, 7 boards per contest, but South Carolina State 15.5 turnovers per game. They shoot just 29% for 3-point range. You've got Mitchell Taylor, who's been able to give you about 8.5 points per contest, and right now he leads the way in the backcourt. For Howard, they did lose quite a few pieces like Elijah Hawkins from last season, but you still have Bryce Harris, you still have Marcus Dockery. These two guys would be able to combine for about 26.5 points per contest. Dockery shooting 38% from Prairie, and all in all, Howard, they have about as many turnovers per game as the South Carolina State team does at 15.3, but they're shooting 35.5% from 3-point range, having a bunch of guys like Shai Odom being able to give you a few boards. That should be more than enough for this Howard team to be able to get the job done, as Howard coming off of a 54-point clunker against NC Central, but prior to that, had gotten to 70-plus in each of their last 4 games. Meanwhile, this is a South Carolina State team that next time they give up fewer than 75, let me know, because this is a bunch that they have now given up 75 plus points, and this includes a game against a non-D1 team in each of their last 9. So it is a spot where I set my total at 155, looking at the over, and said Howard has a 7-point favorite, so I'm going to be willing to lay the number. 306-597, 306-598. Incarnate Word is on the road facing off against Lamar. Lamar, a 7 to 7.5 point favorite. Total is 156.5. Set my total at 156. I'm going to be looking at the under. You do have two teams that are really looking to push tempo, and for this Lamar team, they have been really the antithesis of this out there in the Southland, 24th in the country in terms of total possessions per game. That said, I just don't think that Incarnate Word is going to be able to do a clean enough job of being able to do their part with this. So I did set my line at a 6. I'm going to be willing to take the points in this spot. It is a team in Lamar that has actually been shooting it really well from 3-point range, but they also do turn the ball over about 14.5 times per contest. So you've got your good things about this team, and then you have your not so great things about this team. And the one thing that Incarnate Word has been able to do on defense, they're 107th in the country in terms of opponents' 3-point shooting percentage, and it's actually better on the road rather than at home. They're allowing opponents to shoot just 31.4% from 3-point range. This is a Incarnate Word team that they get a little bit of a boost from the transfer portal as well. They've gotten some really nice results out of Skywicks, a non-D1 player that has come over. He's been able to get the team right around 14 to 15 points, 7 boards per contest, so really like what he's able to bring to the table. Sean Robinson, who was over at Austin P last year, has been able to give this team a double-figure amount of points as well. Now for Incarnate Word, if you look at the overall defense, it's right around about 266th in the country in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis, and it's not like this Lamar team is doing a spectacular job either. They're about 225th in the country in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. I do think that it's going to be a little bit tough for this Incarnate Word team to be able to win the battle down low, because you do have Alex Hamilton, who's been able to do a nice job for this Lamar team. 11.5 points, 7.2 rebounds per game, and this is a Lamar team that really is one of those whole is greater than the sum of its parts sorts of teams, because Hamilton, approximately 11.8 points per game, he's the team's leading scorer, but you've got 7 different guys that give you at least 8.4 points per contest. You've also been able to get right around about 5.5 boards, 11.5 points per game out of Scary Terry Anderson. As a whole, this is a Lamar team that is shooting about 37% from 3-point range, but I do think that against this Incarnate Word defense, it's going to be falling off a little bit. And now for Incarnate Word, Alex Anderson, one of those 2-time transfers, he's eligible. He's able to play for this team. It's been a little bit all over the place with about 10.5 points, but 4.5 boards, 4.5 assists. That gives this backcourt just a little bit more leadership. Should help them take care of the ball a little bit better. And then you got Josh Morgan bombing it at about 38% from 3-point range. I do think that this is an Incarnate Word team that's going to be able to hang in there against a Lamar bunch that turns their 3-point shooting defense to earn 77th in all of college basketball. So did set my line at a 156 in terms of total. I do think that Lamar cools off a little bit from the outside, so looking at the under, and with Incarnate Word willing to take 6.5 or more with them. 306-599, 306-600. It is Texas A&M Corpus Christi playing against Houston Christian. Houston Christian is an underdog of 13 to 14 points on this game. Is 152 to 152.5. All but 2 of Texas A&M Corpus Christi's games have gone under the total. I think that this is the exception. I'm going to be going over, and the reason why I think that this is the exception is that you've got a Houston Christian team that ranks in the top 10 in terms of total possessions per game. So they are absolutely playing at warp speed, and they're 343rd in all of college basketball in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. I mean, oy vey. They just can't guard a soul right now. Corpus Christi has actually been quite decent with their defense. We're in 62nd in the country in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. That's nothing to sneeze at. And for this Corpus Christi team, they don't necessarily do a great job of going bombs away from 3, but at home they're allowing opponents to shoot 27.8% from 3-point range. That is actually a top 65 mark in terms of both home and road numbers. At home specifically, that is a top 50 clip, so they've been able to do a really nice job of holding up there. And for the Houston Christian team, it just doesn't have a lot going for this bunch, which is why I did set my line at a 14 in this ordeal as well. For Houston Christian, I like Marcus Green. He's been able to supply the team with about 15 points, 3.5 assists, shoots 40% from 3-point range, and when Jay Alvarez has been in there, that's been tremendous. Just returned after being off for darn near a month against Nicholls. He was able to put in there 22 points, so Houston Christian should be able to get back to really good form on offense. So they're just not a good 3-point shooting team. They shoot 24.2% from distance, which honestly does mitigate a little bit of what Corpus Christi does from the outside, but when it comes to Houston Christian, they're going to look to Bonke Medding, who's been able to give you 8 rebounds per game, by Michael Imarajabe. Hopefully I said that correctly, giving you about 8.5 rebounds per game to be able to win the battle down low, but I just don't think they're going to be able to do so, because even though this Texas A&M Corpus Christi team has only one really primary rebounder, Gary Clark, 8 boards, right around about 10.5 points per contest, they do a relatively solid job as a collective as they bring in Dane Prim. He was playing last year over at Northwestern St. He's been able to give the team about 7 points, 5.5 rebounds per game. I do think that they're going to be able to elevate a little bit more moving forward, and though this is a Corpus Christi team that they do have some things that are different from last year. Last year they were a really good 3-point shooting team. This year they're shooting about 30 to 31% from 3-point range. They still do a nice job of being able to generate steals, turning defense into offense, and they still get to go up against a HOU Christian team that, despite the fact that they've got those 2 top rebounders, they rank 311th in all of college basketball with regards to rebound rate, and for this Corpus Christi team, they're more around 82nd, and their rebound rate at home is honestly a top 50 mark in all of college basketball. They're pulling in 59.5% of total rebounds at home. That's actually closer to a top 10 mark in all of college basketball, so we should see some domination in Corpus Christi really being able to get their offense going against the HOU Christian team that's just bleeding points at this point. So I did set my total at 160, looking at the over, and I'm willing to lay up to 13.5 with Corpus Christi. 306-601, 306-602. Grambling is going to be playing against the Texas Southern. This is a pick'em game with your total at a 132.5. I did set Texas Southern as the road favorite of 3.5 points. I'm going to be willing to lay it. I can't remember the last time I've seen such a stark drop-off with the defense. Grambling last year was a top 20 team in the country in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. Grambling this season, 351st in the country in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. I mean, good gosh almighty, that is really bad. Meanwhile, you've got a Texas Southern team that they themselves are 277th in the country in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. They are allowing 8 points more per 100 possessions than a season ago. I do think that Texas Southern, though, they're going to be able to figure out just a little bit more in this spot, going up against the Grambling team that last year, with guys like Kiatari Gordon and company, they were able to do a great job of hitting the glass, just not doing that this year. Grambling, 337th in all of college basketball in terms of total rebound rate. Now, Texas Southern has their warts as well. They're more around 310th, though, and when it comes to the Texas Southern team, they got off to a just horrible start offensively. They are a bottom 25 team in the country in terms of points scored on a per possession basis, but fortunately for them, it's not like they're going up against some sort of a world beater on offense, so they should be able to hold their own, especially with PJ Henry being a little bit banged up and now being back in the fold for this bunch. For Mr. Henry, 13.5 points, shoots about 30% from 3-point range. And then Jonathan Cisse, the transfer that comes over from Incarnate Word. It took him a little while to get going, only giving you about 9.5 points, 2.3 assists per contest, but now shooting about 39.5% from 3-point range. I like what I've seen from him recently. Has been able to get to double figures in 4 out of the team's last 5 games. Flip side for the Grambling team, you're looking at Contavious Dozier really having to hold things down for this offense, about 13 points per contest. Has shot about 30% from 3-point range, and now they've been able to get a little bit more out of Antoine Burnett. Began the season a little bit banged up, 10.5 points, 5.5 boards per contest, but for Grambling, they turn the ball over darn near 14 times per contest. They shoot just 28.5% from 3-point range. Where they really thrive is being able to generate turnovers. But for Texas Southern, the one thing that they've done on offense is actually take halfway decent care of the ball. They're only turning the ball over about 12 times per contest, so credit where credit is due there. And these are a pair of teams that they aren't necessarily pushing tempo. Grambling, 306th in the country in terms of total possessions per game. This is a Texas Southern bunch that they're more around 168th, and we've just seen it time and time again. Texas Southern, they always play one of the toughest non-conference schedules in all of college basketball, with badly warps their numbers. And then when they get in conference play, they're able to find it just a little bit more. Semi-total 131.5. It's a case of something's got to give. I do think that Texas Southern, as they do year in and year out, going to continue to stink from 3-point range, but I do think that they're going to be able to pound the ball inside, find their defense. So I'm looking at the under, and I'm going to be looking to take Texas Southern, set them as 3.5 point favorite. 306-603, 306-604. Alabama A&M hits the road to face off against Mississippi Valley State. Mississippi Valley State is between an 8 to a 9-point home underdog. Totals between 132 and 134. You'll be shocked to know that Mississippi Valley State is not the worst team in the country with regards to cover rate, and I do think there might be a little bit of positivity coming in for Mississippi Valley State. I did set them as a 7-point underdog. I am going to be willing to take the points, mainly because I do think that this is going to be a little bit of a low-scoring slog, as Mississippi Valley State, they are scoring about 10.5 points fewer per 100 possessions than every team not named Coppin State in all of college basketball. They and Coppin State are just a level of sync all to their own. Meanwhile, you've got an Alabama A&M team that they were able to hold Arkansas Pine Bluff to 62 points the other day, but you take a look at Alabama A&M. They're in the bottom 75 in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis, and for this Alabama A&M team, this team just defensively has really been giving it up. They have given up 78 plus points in all but 2 of their games against Division I foes thus far this season. So if there is a time for Mississippi Valley State to get going, it is now. I did set my total at 133. Personally, I would rather have the 134 under rather than the 132 over because I have a lack of faith in Mississippi Valley State. But if we see market-wide 132 or less, I will dive in on the over. You've got Raekwon Brown for this Mississippi Valley State team actually giving you a good effort. 14.5 points, 5.5 boards. You've actually got a north of 50% three-point shooter in Areco Gibson, who's been doing a lot more recently. That's been able to help out Mississippi Valley State as he's now been able to supply the team with double figures in 3 out of the last 4 games. So got to give some credit where credit is due. And I do still think that Alabama A&M should be able to win this game outright. That said, Alabama A&M does not have a single guy on the roster that gives you north of 4 rebounds per contest. That's just absolutely terrible. They are 285th in the country in terms of overall rebound rate now for Mississippi Valley State. Bottom 10 team in the country in points scored on a per possession basis. Bottom 10 team in the country in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis. That is a really, really bad duo, but Alabama A&M leaves themselves very vulnerable on the inside. Opponents are shooting 55.3% from 2-point range, and that's the way the Mississippi Valley State is going to need to get a lot of their buckets. Both of these teams, they've had their turnover woes, especially Mississippi Valley State. Out of 362 Division I teams, they are 362nd with this regard, but you got an Alabama A&M team that they really don't force a lot of those turnovers. They've been relying heavily on Dallin Smith to be able to supply for this team. 13 points, right around 3 boards per contest. Now, the good news is you get back in the fold one of their main guards from the last few years, and Cameron Tucker has come back for the last 5 games, 8 points, 4 boards, is able to take the load off in terms of facilitation. But while Mississippi Valley State is bad with regards to their shooting, Alabama A&M, 17 turnovers per game. They shoot 27% from 3-point range. I do think that you're looking at another sloppy Joe's game, but that said, with the way that both of these teams give up points, I do think that there's going to be a little bit of brightness for both of these offenses. At a 134, I'm going to be looking at the under, but for Mississippi Valley State, they covered the last game against Alabama State. I think that it could be another yucky game in which you're just barely able to hold in there. Set my line at 7, taking the points with Mississippi Valley State, and taking a look at this 134 under. Now we get my DK network right up. This is 306-605, 306-606. You've got Alabama State on the road facing off against Arkansas Pine Bluff. Pine Bluff is a home underdog of 3 points. This game is 151. The write-up is on the over. Arkansas Pine Bluff has the highest over rate in all of college basketball. All but one of their games have went over the total. That was their last game against Alabama A&M, in which they lost that game 63-62. Alabama A&M had more turnovers than made buckets. Arkansas Pine Bluff just shot an unsightly 7 of 28 from 3-point range. Both were outliers. Both, I think, are going to be adjusted, as you've got Arkansas Pine Bluff, who prior to that game against D1 competition had allowed at least 80 points in every single game thus far this season. As a matter of fact, at least 83 points to every single game against another Division I team thus far this season. Both of these teams playing at a very fast pace. Pine Bluff, 18th in the country in terms of total possessions per game. Alabama State, 99th in the country. For Alabama State, they don't necessarily shoot it amazingly from 3-point range. That said, you get to go up against a Pine Bluff team that they are one of the worst teams at being able to guard the arc in all of college basketball. 359th in terms of overall points allowed on a per possession basis. Pine Bluff 361st, and a big reason why Pine Bluff out of 362 D1 teams in terms of defensive rebound rate, 362nd. They are allowing opponents to rebound 39% of their misses, and despite all this, I am going to be looking at Arkansas Pine Bluff outright on the money line, and that's because they've got their feature two in Rashad Williams along Kylan Milton. These two guys are combined to be able to give you 37 points per contest between the two of them. They shoot 39.5% from 3, and all in all, it is an Arkansas Pine Bluff team as a top 55 team in the country with their 36.7% 3-point shooting percentage. You lump in there the non-D1 numbers, that actually goes up to nearly 39% from 3-point range. Joe French is another guy that's able to give you about 16.5 points per contest, and they face off with an Alabama State team that they themselves have their defensive votes 225th in the country, and opponents' 3-point shooting percentage 235th in the country in terms of just points allowed on a per possession basis. Now for Alabama State, you do have TJ Madlock, the son of Tony Medlock, the coach, who's been Mr. Do-It-All for the team, 15 points, 4.5 boards per contest. And typically, when it comes to Arkansas Pine Bluff, this team is just completely based on the glass. But that said, for Alabama State, you've got Obung Okan, who's been able to give you 6.5 rebounds per game at 7'1". He's the only guy on the roster that gives you north of 4.5 rebounds per game. It's very interesting with this Alabama State team because they do a really good job of being able to generate second and third chances with the way that they box out, the way that they sell out to be able to get those second chance opportunities. With that said, in terms of the defensive glass as well, they should be allowing Arkansas Pine Bluff to be able to get quite a few of those as well as Alabama State, right around about 182nd in all of college basketball in terms of percentage of missed shots that they rebound themselves. So that's something that I do take a look at, and I do think that for Alabama State, they're going to have a tough time being able to match up with a Pine Bluff team that should be able to pop off, should be able to make quite a few threes. It's an Alabama State team that, to their credit, they take good care of the ball as well. 11 turnovers per game. I think that you get an up and down game where we're going to see a lot of made shots. I do think that Alabama State is going to get a lot of twos. Pine Bluff, they make those threes, and I think that they win the game as a result. My DK Network write-up pick, that is on the over. Semi-total 165. I think that we're going to continue to see Pine Bluff play at warp speed, and with Pine Bluff taking them out right on the money line, made them a 3-point favorite, and we wrap things up with 306, 607, 306, 608. Southern plays us for Prairie View. Prairie View is an underdog of 6 points, total on this game between 143 and 143.5, and set my line at 10. I'm going to be willing to lay with Southern. Southern has already won on the road this year against both UNLV and Mississippi State. That's honestly not a bad resume for a Power 6 team, and for Southern, where they really do have their issues, is down low. You've got one guy that gives you north of 4 rebounds per game. Derek Tezeno has been able to give you 7.5 points, 4.5 boards, so they're going to get completely destroyed with that regard. But I love what I'm seeing out of the Radford transfer. Tayron Joseph was able to supply the team with 19 points per contest. Doesn't shoot it well from 3-point range, but you've got some relatively good facilitation as well, with about 4.5 assists, 8.5 points per game out of Tajani Diomasi. He comes over from France, and he's been able to do a solid job of being able to engineer this offense. It is a Southern team that they only shoot about 30 or so percent from 3-point range, and for Southern, there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. It's going to be a rough go effort for them on the glass, but it's not like this Prairie View team does an amazing job of being able to pound the boards as well. Southern 339th of the country in terms of overall rebound rate. It's a Prairie View team that right now they're clocking in 358th, and for Prairie View, they gamble for turnovers, and when they don't generate a turnover, well, they are just completely left in the dust, and they're going to be giving up a very wide open shot. As for Prairie View, in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis, despite the fact that they're a top 50 team in the country in terms of turnover rate, 270th in the nation, this is a Southern team that they themselves leave a little bit of something to be desired, as they're currently clocking in terms of points allowed on a per possession basis, more in that neighborhood of about 263rd. But for Southern, this is not even a joke. This is a real stat. They're giving up more than 35 points fewer per 100 possessions at home rather than on the road. That's because of a very small sample size and one really, really good home performance, and that just completely throws off the numbers. But for Prairie View, they just don't have a lot of ways to be able to exploit this Southern defense because they just don't do an amazing job themselves from 3-point range. You've had Charles Smith, the fourth, come in, give the team 13 points, shoots about 35.5% from 3-point range. And then the Tarleton State transfer, Devontae Hawkins, about 5 boards, 13 points per contest. Doesn't necessarily shoot it well from 3, but he's able to do a solid job. But other than Brandon Miles, you really don't have anyone that gives you north of 6.5 rebounds per game. It's a Prairie View team that leaves themselves very vulnerable on the inside as well, because this is a Southern team that they've had a tough time being able to shoot it from the outside, but they do a nice job of being able to knife the ball down low, being able to cut to the basket and draw a few fouls that way as well. But for this Prairie View team, out of your 363 Division I teams, they are clocking in 326th in opponents' shoot-point shooting percentage, and not that Southern is necessarily amazing with this regard. They're 358th with this regard as well, but allowing opponents to shoot just 35% from 2-point range when they're at home as well. I do have my question marks with this Prairie View style. They themselves turn the ball over about 13 times per contest, so I do think that you're going to see very much an up-and-down game with a Prairie View team that ranks in the top 40 nationally in terms of total possessions per game, and Southern, they themselves, they are really looking to push some tempo as well. As Southern, they're about 60th in the country in terms of total possessions per game, so I do think that both of these teams get a lot of live ball steals, turn those into fast break buckets. Semi-total 152, looking at the over. It says Southern has a 10-point favorite, so I'm going to be one to lay the number, and that will wrap things up for the Monday edition of Coast to Coast Hoops, now part of the VSiN family of podcasts. Big thanks to Mike Randle of FTN Bets for joining me in the last segment. If you do like hearing from this fine podcast, Coast to Coast Hoops, you're able to subscribe wherever your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn. If you have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you do have one of two ways we fire those in. First one is my Twitter /X timeline at @JUnit_D1. Keep in mind, letters EM, the mean does not matter. As per usual, usual, please do send these into the timeline and the other ways via an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. From there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review coming at you guys every single day throughout the college basketball season. That means I'm coming at you once again tomorrow. Thank you so much for tuning in.